top, san man no come spoil my own.
Now yeah, they carry.
San man no come spoil my own.
Now yeah, they carry.
Tell me, my brother.
Tell me.
Why not? Tell me, if not.
Tell me.
Why not? Tell me, if not.
Tell me.
Tell me why I go get it, I no go see.
Tell me.
Tell me why I go get it, nose I no go smell.
Tell me.
Tell me why I go get it, air I no go hear.
Tell me.
Tell me why I go get it, mouth I no go talk.
Tell me.
Tell me why I go get it, ear I no go home.
One of the most important democratic advances of the past 40 years has been the development of independent, non-partisan citizen election observers. Around the world and in nearly every African country, citizen observer organizations work tirelessly to defend the rights of citizens to vote and to promote more inclusive, transparent, and accountable elections. Their efforts have served, one, to promote election-related rights and electoral integrity by deterring fraud. Two, to expose manipulation when it does occur. Three, to give voters greater confidence to participate and vote their conscience. Four, to engage citizens directly in electoral processes and strengthen civic organizations and capacity to advance democracy. Reflecting the global democratic decline, observer rights are under threat around the world and across Africa. In many countries, political space is closing, and restrictive laws and regulations are being used to undermine the ability of citizen organizations to observe electoral processes. As a result, more and more citizen observer organizations are under threat, with their offices being raided, the leadership and staff and observers intimidated, and in some cases, even killed. Being a citizen observer in many countries has become a dangerous business. At the same time, accreditation, which was once relatively perfunctory and limited to access to polling stations on election, has become more and more burdensome and is now often required for other elements of the electoral process. In some cases, this is intended to limit the rights of the citizen observation, while in others, it has the unintended consequences of undermining the ability of citizen organizations to observe election processes. At the very moment when citizen observer organizations should be focused on observing critical aspects of the electoral process, they are instead increasingly having to spend their time in complying with onerous and unnecessary accreditation procedures. Further, to meaningfully observe elections increasingly requires access to election data such as lists of registered voters, lists of polling stations, and results broken down by polling station. However, often this data is not available or not provided in a timely manner or in a useful format. This further undermines the rights of the observers to assess the entire electoral process. Citizen observers here in Africa and more broadly are pushing back against the trends to maintain their right to observe elections. Their efforts have recently been strengthened by the statement by the United Nations Special Rapporteurs on the right to freedom of peaceful assembly and of association, and on the situation of human rights defenders, for the first time ever recognizing electoral observers, international and citizen, as human rights defenders. In addition, the joint communique on cooperation between international and citizen observers provide a valuable new framework for international observers to support citizen observers' rights. We are fortunate to have with us a distinguished array of leaders from African citizen election observation organizations, as well as representatives from international observer organizations and the broader international community with us to discuss how we can better defend citizen observer rights by pushing back on closing spaces and administrative burdens. With these few words, I welcome everyone in attendance, either in person or virtually, to this event. However, before we start with our first session, I've been asked to make a few logistical announcements. Please note that we are broadcasting this through Zoom and will be photographing and recording today's event. We will be sharing a recording of the event with all the participants. For those of us joining virtually, we will try as possible to engage with you as much as technology permits. Please use the questions and answers function on the Zoom to submit any questions. We will try to respond to your questions. Unfortunately, this event is in English without translation, so we apologize to the speakers of other languages. We encourage you to share today's event on the social media and tag our sponsors, Election Support Network of Southern Africa, East and Horn of Africa Elections Observers Network, West Africa Election Observers Network, and Africa Election Observers Network, our hosts, CMG, and our organizers, NDI and OASF. For participants here today, please feel free to grab a cup of coffee or tea right outside of this room. And also for those who are attending in person and are pre-registered, I'd like to inform you that lunch will be served at the conclusion of this session, and coupons will be distributed at that point. Finally, restrooms are located near the elevators on this floor. Thank you. Now we move on to the first session. So last year, the United Nations Special Rapporteurs on the freedom to the right to freedom of peaceful assembly and of association, and on the situation of human rights defenders, for the first time ever, issued a public statement explicitly recognizing citizen observers. Unfortunately, the UN Special Rapporteur on the situation of human rights defenders, Lawlor, could not be with us in person today, but she fortunately recorded a video which we are going to share with you, her welcoming remarks. So ladies and gentlemen, let's now listen to the welcome remarks from Mary. Thank you.
Dear friends, thank you very much for inviting me to this important and timely event. Though I'm not able to join you in person, I would like to share some thoughts with you. My mandate as the UN Special Rapporteur on the situation of human rights defenders was created by the Human Rights Council to examine and report on the situation of human rights defenders worldwide. But who are human rights defenders? They are individuals or groups of individuals striving for the promotion and protection of human rights in a peaceful manner and recognizing the universality of human rights. This is the definition of the Declaration on Human Rights Defenders, a document which was adopted 25 years ago by consensus by the General Assembly. I would like to refer to Articles 1 and 2 of the Declaration, which state that everyone has the right, individually or in association with others, to promote and strive for the protection and realization of human rights and fundamental freedoms at the national and international levels, and that each state has a prime responsibility and duty to protect, promote and implement all human rights and fundamental freedoms. I would also like to refer to Article 12, which provides that the state shall take all necessary measures to ensure the protection of everyone against any violence, threats, retaliation, de facto or de jure adverse discrimination, pressure, or any other arbitrary action as a consequence of their legitimate exercise of the rights referred to in the Declaration. The work of election observers, who can be considered as human rights defenders under specific circumstances and if they are facing violation, focuses on civil and political rights, including the rights to vote and to stand for election, the rights to political affiliation and freedom of association, the right to access information, to freedom of the media and to expression, to peaceful assembly, movement, security of persons, and equal protection of the law for prospective voters and those seeking to be elected, as well as access to effective remedies when electoral-related rights are violated. I have observed with great concern that across the globe, the conditions in which democratic elections are held have become increasingly difficult. Disinformation campaigns, harsh rhetoric, and even violence have targeted the broad spectrum of stakeholders who participate in electoral processes, from candidates to political parties to election officials and election observers. Both national and international electoral observers have reported a significant escalation in the severity and the scale of attacks against them, ranging from harassment, false accusation, defamation and threats, to infringement on their right to free movement, detention, expulsion and physical violence. Some have even been killed while carrying out their work. In a number of cases, the harassment, assaults and killings have been perpetrated by members of the state security services. This is unacceptable. My mandate is able to raise such concerns directly with the governments concerned. So I urge you all to submit cases to me. After duly verifying and substantiating the cases, I can get in touch with the governments either through formal letters, the so-called communication system, or via quiet diplomacy, I suppose, raising my concerns in direct meetings with ambassadors and other stakeholders. I am also mandated to raise cases and situations with non-state actors besides government. These can include business enterprises and also armed groups, both of which have committed human rights violations against election observers in the past and who have human rights obligation. In carrying out my mandate, I will continue to stress that states need to take all necessary steps to establish conditions that allow national and international election observers to effectively do their work and to protect them from any violence, threat, retaliation, adverse discrimination, pressure, or any other arbitrary action as a consequence of their legitimate exercise of their rights and freedoms. I wish you a fruitful and interesting discussion and remain at your disposal. Thank you very much.
Okay, so those are words of wisdom and also highlighting the challenges that are facing the human rights defenders, and we are invited to submit any cases of human rights violation of the local and international election observers. Now we'll move on to the next session. The next session we are supposed to have Olga joining us from Poland, but we've lost the connection with her. So we'll come back to Olga later on, when and if the time allows us, or the technology allows us. Now we move on to the next session, which is the panel. Our panel on citizen observer rights in Africa. This panel will be moderated by Samson Itodo, who is the executive director of the Citizen Observer Organization, IAGA Africa, from Nigeria. So please bear with us as we rearrange the stage for the panel.
Well, thank you. Thank you and good morning, everyone. So what we will try to do in the next 35 or 40 minutes is to have this eminent panel. Eminent because they don't look like what they've been through or what they're going through this morning as election observers, to sort of talk us through this important discussion around observer rights. As you all know, election observation is a risky and a thankless job. And election observers do good work and fantastic work. However, as we have been told this morning and based on our experiences, there are situations where observers and citizens groups have been victims of intimidation, arrest, and introduction of draconian legislations that impede on the abilities of observer groups to perform, their function. And even whilst this meeting isn't formally linked to the Summit of Democracy, but it is an important discussion as we talk about democratic renewal globally and in Africa. And what this panel will do is to help us understand what are the experiences of observer groups and how rights have been assaulted by different actors. And we'll try to narrow down to what we can do to continually protect observer rights, because election observation is still relevant. It's important for the survival of democracy. And so, without further ado, Kojo, I will come to you. So if you can grab the mic. Kojo is the Director for Advocacy at the Center for Democracy, Democratic Development, CDD Ghana. And CDD Ghana hosts the West Africa Election Observation Network Secretariat. So Kojo, can you help us understand what does the landscape look like across Africa with this attack and assault on observer rights? And is the space shrinking or the space is expanding? And maybe if you can share some experiences just to look at what the landscape is across Africa.
Thank you very much, Samson. Good morning to everybody. Really pleased to be here. I think, so we have to remember that we have, I think, 16 elections, presidential, legislative elections for 2023, be another 19 for 2024. Now, whilst elections does not equate to democracy, it is still the key means for sustaining our democracy, particularly in the context of a decline or a retreat in democracy. So election observers become very key if we want credible elections, if we want peaceful elections, and therefore the opportunity to actually fight back against, authoritarianism, rising popularism, and all of the challenges that we are currently having. Now, election observers also are playing two roles. Because they represent the rights of others through the activity of election observation, protecting them is important for protecting the larger society. When they participate in elections, they themselves exercise that right, but they are also exercising that right for others. So they are very, very important in protecting and promoting human rights defenders across the globe. Is the space closing or opening? It's definitely closing. I think the general decline in democracy across the world, particularly featuring closing spaces with the rise of authoritarianism, has coincided with this attack on election observers. If you look at the Civicus report of 2021, they talk about the year-on-year phenomenon of closing spaces. The same with the Freedom House report. I think the Freedom House report indicates that this is the 17th year of declining global freedoms. So we are gradually getting into almost 2 decades of just, a negative trend. And what that has done is to make the environment vulnerable for almost everybody. For some examples, in 2019, there was the assassination of Mr. Anastasio Matavel, who was the executive director of the Provincial Forum of NGOs in Mozambique. And, this attack was orchestrated by, state and non-state actors. And up to today, nothing has happened. We know in Uganda, we had 21 observers detained, arrested. As for that election, it was almost like a movie, because it was not even something that anybody was hiding. Everybody could see the brutality of all actors during that election. We have seen in Mali recently where there's a prohibition on NGOs receiving funds from some countries, and basically bringing the activities of observers and other human rights defenders to a halt. So we are experiencing all these violations, and that's making election observation a very dangerous activity. But I wanted to, in terms of the landscape, I wanted to be a little more specific, just to highlight for me some of the areas of violations that I think we have to pay attention to. So an area which I think really is almost foundational for what we are now seeing with EMBs and the way in which they are doing with accreditation has to do with the rights to association. So we've seen NGO legislation, a lot of restriction that's coming through NGO legislation, particularly requesting NGOs to register, very elaborate processes of registration at different levels. Because you have to remember, associational life for many countries, in many societies, is really basic. If you have a check group and you are in your area, you decide that you want to observe elections, the requirement that you have to have, a board of directors, audited accounts, incorporate, and all of those things are irrelevant, because it denies you the right to associational life and to participate in governance. But we are seeing these NGO legislation increasingly having these provisions. Then you have the limitations on foreign funding. And we know that in the case, particularly in Africa, you don't really want state funding. Fitness is there because of what it comes with. And so a lot of NGOs do rely on foreign funding. And that is where the attack is coming from. And then there's all this limitation to scope, that you should not engage in political activity. The whole essence of participating in governance is political. So it means that basically you are doing service delivery or some other type of charitable activity, you cannot participate. We've seen also restrictions through national security, cyber security, reasons to sort of arrest people because they are enemies of the state, they are threatening the state, and so on and so forth. And so the EMBs have picked up on this, and now you are getting requirements that you have to bring in your incorporated documents. You have to fill these application forms. You have to pay these fees. You need to provide photos of every single observer. I mean, we in Ghana, sometimes we put out 8,000 observers, and you have to find photos of all of them and go and process them. I have slept in, offices of Electoral Commission for 2 days trying to sort out observation, accreditation cards, and so on. So
Okay,
you are getting these kinds of
Yes.
restrictions for observers, and of course with implications for the way we are able to observe as well.
Well, thanks, Kojo, for sort of painting a picture. And one striking thing you said was the space is shrinking and it's closed. Sarah, do you agree the space is shrinking and it's closed? Because he also mentioned your country, and you work in Uganda, but also in East Africa. Do you share Kojo's sentiments?
Yes, I do, and I think the debate needs to move from mere mention of closing spaces, because some of the spaces are closed. They are not just closing. It's true election observers were arrested in Uganda for observing elections that they were accredited to do. A total of 28 election observers were detained for 6 days, and they had to report to police for another 6 months. I was on the scene of the crime. I only stepped out to call other lawyers for reinforcement, and that's how I survived arrest. And we were arrested after releasing the first press conference on commencement of 2021 elections, because government, after internet shutdown, never expected us to get information on commencement of elections countrywide. But we had put in place alternative means, and a part of the lessons that I will share is the need for risk assessment in closing or closed spaces, risk assessment, and a multiple planning in case of eventualities, like the arrest of election observers, internet shutdown. So we called our election observers and used SMS. We had to operate like we are in analog era, and got information covering the whole country. So when we released the first statement, government panicked, thinking the international community had provided us internet, because nobody was expected to communicate with other people beyond their localities, and they came to arrest us. The other issues that happen is, how do we then survive in such harsh conditions? We form coalitions with media. First of all, we don't operate alone. We all make sure we extend the risk. So we operate as a group of CSO actors, and it's normally difficult for government to come and arrest 20 or 30 organizations at the same time, except that they were in too much panic during elections because they knew they had lost legitimacy amongst the people. So we work in coalitions, and then media does timely reporting, which helps for rapid response, and other actors for rescue. Immediately when they arrested us, media was broadcast the news, and all lawyers, we were also working with the Uganda Law Society, all lawyers came to the venue, and it became difficult to arrest some of us that were outside. They only managed to take the people in the room. But the plan was to arrest everybody that had been accredited to observe elections. Another means of how we survive, because at times it's difficult to get space in the mainstream media, when government reaches a time and they don't want to hear dissenting views, they control or threaten media houses from hosting some of the election observers. So we have created alternative media in the digital era. We run some of the online TVs. We have created the Civic Space TV in Uganda, which is digital and can operate anywhere. And we are able to keep communicating with the people, because once you're cut off from the people that you act on behalf of, then you lose legitimacy as election observers and civil society actors. The other mechanism we employed in place is a virtual observation through neighboring countries. In 2020, the team in Kenya was able to observe elections in Tanzania after the closing of civic space by the late Magufuli. We set up an observer center in Kenya with the help of ILOG colleagues, some of them were in the room, and we were able to even work with a team of eminent persons led by the former Chief Justice William Mutunga, Professor Sempebwa, and others, and we were able to observe elections in Tanzania using the remote information that we got from actors in Tanzania. When internet was shut down in Uganda, the same mechanism was reactivated in Kenya, and we kept sending information using SMS and emails to our colleagues in Kenya to keep sharing information on elections in a timely manner, as well as helping us to broadcast what was happening in Uganda's elections in a timely manner. The other mechanism we use is a strategic litigation to push back where there is time on some of the draconian laws, legislations, and actions of the state in all the other countries. Okay. As I see time is running out, but to summarize, the other mechanisms we can use is develop a contingency plan in case of observer activities are disrupted, but also ensure that there is documentation, especially using digital means. So thank you very much.
Well, thanks, Sarah, for sharing these inspiring stories and how you're able to deal with this complex situation. So let's go to Southern Africa and to Zambia, where Peter holds sway. Incredible work CCMG has been involved with. But you've done tremendous work on voter registration. Is there something there you can share with us about how you've been able to codify, observer rights, and what kind of challenges did you face, and perhaps how you're able to navigate those challenges? Because we've seen, the story of resilience in Uganda. Is that the same story in Zambia?
Well, thank you very much, Samson. And so in terms of what we had been able to do, first and foremost is that the rights of observers are not explicit in the legal framework, and that's why we believe that there is need then therefore to have the rights of observers codified within the legal framework. But of course, being mindful of over-legislating. But I think the issue of discretionary powers being given to the Commission is one of the issues that affect then the rights of observers to be enjoyed. In terms of what we're able to do with regards observing voter registration, well, I would say that the Commission here was not even prepared to have monitors accredited for the process. So CCMG really took it upon itself to press upon the commission to be able to accredit. So we managed to have our monitors accredited and deployed to a number of registration centers. However, the challenges that we faced there was that we were not able to collect daily registration statistics, which are kind of useful for us to understand how the process is going, but also so that we can then inform our strategies on trying to increase appetite from the citizens' point of view to go out and register. So that then becomes a huge challenge. There was no information about how many kits were deployed, and later on the issue of replacing them in terms of functionality. And I think that then becomes an issue as you go to look at dealing with the issue of over-registration in some areas as well as under-registration in others. So you need to understand why you want to do additional registration, not based on the standard that you planned to do additional registration across the board, but based on the understanding that there are areas that actually need that kind of registration, and you focus your energies in that regard. One of the things that we also tried to do was to do a verification of the voters list. This is from the understanding that the period that was given to do a new register was kind of short. It was 30 days to register approximately 9 million voters, and the decision by the commission then to do a new registration was not based on consensus. So there was a lot of misgivings and, skepticism around the public in terms of why the commission was going ahead to do that kind of work. And this is where now, voter list verification become important, so that then it builds confidence in the process, but also identifies the challenges within the registration itself. So we're unable to do that because the commission did not allow us access to a voters list. Again, that should be a matter of right for observers, because then our interests are different. So we tried then to use another way of conducting that audit through the people to list methodology, but then it required us to get registration details from consenting registered voters. And then we would use the USSD provided by the commission to try and verify their details. Now, that also was faced with some challenge because as all this was happening, the commission decided to change the regulation and provide a section in there which was restricting anyone from accessing voter registration information from voters. So we immediately returned to and that was the quickest time that the commission ever, reached out to CCMG, and we're really surprised. But anyway, that was one of the things that we faced. So part of our advocacy then is to ensure that such things are removed from the law, but also ensure that the rights of observers are not relegated to a handbook, which in my case would be a kid's drawing book, yeah? You can open it anytime, scribble and close it. But if they are put in a legal framework and an Electoral Process Act, it means that that is, guarded. And, there's a way that then that can be changed. So ideally, those are the major challenges that we faced. And indeed, the issue of restriction for monitors again is real. We had our monitors told to say you cannot observe before you go and pay a courtesy call on a district commissioner or indeed a council secretary. Now look, there is nothing that, a courtesy call is a courtesy call, so we need to do our job. And in any case, the monitors that we have are drawn from within the places. It's not like we are importing them from anywhere. They reside in those communities. So we found that provision to be very problematic, and I think those are things that we need to eliminate going forward. And lastly, I think one of the things that I learned yesterday is that a number of countries have within their framework a provision to charge a prescribed fee for accreditation. And while many of them have not implemented that, the mere fact that that particular provision exists poses a challenge in future, because anyone at a given time can decide to charge $50 per monitor to access a polling station, and that would be a huge challenge on observer groups as well. The issue of burdensome requirements, like Kojo mentioned, in our case, and those of you that were here during the elections, including international observers, would realize that you had to fill out 3 forms, and you had to make copies of your identity cards, and then you had to go in person for accreditation. And so we are advocating as CSOs for then text accreditation, where monitors do not need to present themselves. In any case, if CCMG is sponsoring monitors, it is CCMG that is responsible for those monitors. And I think finally, there was also a restriction on the number of monitors that you can deploy in a constituency. And we found that to be another huge problem and a way of limiting access for monitors. We believe that it is up to the institution's budget to decide how many monitors they can deploy. And so the commission is outside of their right to decide how many monitors an organization can deploy in a constituency. Let me end there.
I'm glad you ended there. We know you are a host. But let's go to Marcella. Permit me to call you Dr. Marcella. The doctor in waiting, and Richard mentioned this at the breakfast table this morning. Yes, all attention will shift to Sierra Leone in about 60 or 65 days, and New is playing a leadership role in that election. Can you first help us understand what are the challenges that you expect as observer groups you would face in the build-up to this election, and maybe also share some of your concerns about the entire preparations for the elections?
Thank you. Thank you so very much, Samson. Before I go to your question proper, 3 of my colleagues have shared what they face in their various contexts within Africa. And I think this is an opportunity to cheer us up, because we are humans too. We have lives, we have emotions, and we feel. But spaces like this give us the confidence that we are working for a better world. We are working for a better country. We desire better societies. And what we are doing is for the benefit of the citizens of our country. And so if we have a space like this, I want to salute all activists. I want to thank all the networks and democracy promoters who have been giving support to us to serve our country. We are humans, and we have feelings too. Now to your question proper. What are the challenges that we expect or anticipated? It's no longer an expectation. The challenges are on us. And that's why I'm sharing the sentiments with my colleagues who have been fighting assiduously to get things done. You see, for National Elections Watch, we have raised our heads above waters. We have survived for 20 years in securing democracy in a post-conflict society in Sierra Leone. We saw elections as the avenue of consolidating the peace. And so we've made sure that we have put non-partisan elections observation at the center of what we do. Now we have become the threat to the society, because in real fact, the work we do expose what I call the spoils mentality in our democracy, the winner-takes-all mentality. And so what we call integrity, for example, is security of tenure for somebody else. And so in a society wherein each and every of the political leaders and heads of state institutions are appointed by the government, they want to secure their position. So when you call for integrity in election, you're actually seen as an affront to the position that they secure, and you become a threat, in the society. And so you find out that, let me put this in a little bit of a context. Post 2018, after the last elections, the society has been even much more divisive and polarized. A recent Afrobarometer study says that, the preferences for political views have shrinked a lot in the country, and there's been real signs of tension between opposing groups, specifically the two lead political parties. And civil society is caught in the middle of that state capture and elite capture. Some of our valiant soldiers in civil society are fallen. They don't have the courage because the politics is ethnicized. They don't have the courage to speak against their own. And so they are fallen within the cracks. And some of us who are in the front line have been facing social media attacks on a daily basis. In fact, the attacks are targeted at women. So as the head of the coalition of 400 civil society organizations and being a woman, I have been specifically targeted on social media with foul language. So it is real. The attacks are real. They are not latent. They're really on us. And we are trying as best as possible, irrespective of all of this. We have been resilient. And that is the confidence I want to share. Because what we see a future of a nation. We see a future of a nation that needs to survive within the ambit of democratic progress. But believe that democracy must deliver where other forms of governance are failed. It makes no sense if we continue to pursue the sham elections in the post-independence period and in pre-1990s. So we want to see how democracy can deliver. We want to see how elections can be conducted with integrity. But as I speak to you, we have a situation where, as National Elections Watch, we failed. This is a strategy that we use to give citizens the confidence that you are the people who are electing your leaders. We make sure that we put one observer in every polling station. We have done that for over 3-4 elections, and we did that in 2018. We fielded over 12,000 observers in Sierra Leone. You were there, Samson, you were there to support us. So this time we'll be having 11,200 polling stations. But as I speak to you, we've only been able to mobilize funds for 50% coverage of the polling station for the June 24th elections. So these are the real issues that are on us. So whilst we are having these attacks, we want to make sure that our bases are really mobilized. We want to make sure that our observers are fully trained. And we want to make sure that in all of this, we are able to secure democracy. Because the Sierra Leonean context is very, very critical, just like Liberia. Securing democracy for us is not only about democracy itself, it's also about peace consolidation and peaceful coexistence. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. I thought that this panel deserves an applause. Well, thank you for those submissions. And I'd like to take another round, but this time ask you very personal questions, and I'm going to go personal. Maybe let's start with Kojo. If you can take the mic. We started on the note that the space is closed and observer rights are under attack. And my question to you, so why do you do this job?
I think it's sometimes I think it's a disease. I don't know why, but when you are up 2 a.m., just upset that somebody's rights have been trampled upon, you don't know why you are so upset, but you don't sleep. And your first thought is, how do I intervene? You know, this cannot be let go. Something has to be said. Because you have a vision for your society. You know the society that you want to live in, and you want to contribute to, realizing it. And you get fatigued, you get tired, sometimes you get demoralized. But at least, I can call Marcella. She probably has a worse problem than I do. And I think these platforms is what encourages us. Most of us also are, let's say, second generation activists. And so we've seen others go before us in even more terrible circumstances and have been triumphant. So I think those things encourages you. But as for the bag, I call it the bag, when you get it, you really can't explain it. You would abandon everything to go and fight and be there. So I think that's
Okay, Peter.
that's one of the reasons.
Why? No, Marcella has told us why, so I'll skip Marcella.
Well, I think not anything different from what Kojo has mentioned. It's when you look around and see that there's something that needs to be done. The space is closing, but you can't just let this go on. Against all odds, as a young person and standing up to older commissioners at the ECZ is not easy. But you believe you just have to do that because it's the right thing. And more so because, you have children yourself and you're growing and you don't want them to then, have that experience. So really it's to ensure that one day we put first of all, our countries and then later on the continent and the world at large in a better place and direct it in the right, trajectory. Thank you.
Sarah, anything different?
I'll just add two things. One is
Keep it
that
to one.
No, two. One is that we do not have any other countries to call home. These are our countries. And the second one is we desire to live in a better country. I don't see why any country should have double standards or speak with a double tongue when it comes to democracy and known universal principles.
Thank you very much. So let's turn to our distinguished audience. Any questions? Questions? We've got mics. Okay, I see. Is that Melville? Okay, yes, I see Melville. There are two hands up. So can we just pass the mic? Melville, only Anglais, no translation? Okay, there's a translator. Oh, thanks for standing up. Thank you. All right. So there's a hand. Melville, if you can stand up and use your activist voice, because we're managing time. Okay, well, we can start with the gentleman, if he's ready. There's a hand there. Yes.
Thank you very much, Samuel. Well, I want to pose this question to you because Nigeria was just from an election. I would want to also know.
Okay.
If that's okay.
Yeah, go ahead.
Since you haven't spoken on the election in Nigeria, we might learn a thing or two from Nigeria, Zambia. What was the experience in the past election on the shrinking spaces, and what can you advise, especially countries that are going to have these elections like Sierra Leone? There are a few things that we can pick from that and probably also strategize on. Thank you. Oh, my name is Daniel Sichilongo, board chairperson of the Center for Young Leaders in Africa.
Oh, great. That's my constituency. Yes, Mabel?
Good morning. My name is Merveille Gozo from DRC. J'aimerais poser une question aux panélistes.
I would like to ask some questions to the panelists.
En 2018, en RDC, nous avons tous appris des autorités que les observateurs internationaux n'ont pas été accrédités, ils n'ont pas été acceptés par les autorités du pays pour qu'ils puissent être accrédités en RDC. Et ma question de savoir si il faut rebondir à ce qui a été dit tout à l'heure, la question qui a été posée aux panélistes de savoir pourquoi ils font ce travail, je pense qu'il y a un besoin en Afrique. C'est un besoin d'intégrité électorale, un besoin de pouvoir changer l'image qu'ont les autres sur l'Afrique et aussi de changer ce qu'avait dit un ancien ministre occidental, que les élections en Afrique sont une sorte de compromis à l'africaine.
Merci. I hope that's the question.
I'm gonna try to translate now if I
Okay.
remember. So in 2018, the Democratic Republic of Congo, international observers were not accredited. So this was an issue for election integrity, and she wants to stress on what has been said in the panel, like why these election observers do their job. She thinks that like there is a need to stress again election integrity in Africa, and has been said from Observateur Occidental. Okay. Has been said by a Western minister. It seems that elections in Africa are a kind of African compromise.
Et finalement, la question est de savoir quels mécanismes devront prendre les observateurs, les organisations d'observation électorale en Afrique pour que leur statut soit permanent et obligatoire, que nous évitions ce qui a été le cas au Congo. Merci.
Merci.
And so the question is, what mechanism should we take to ensure that the status of election observers will be constant and mandatory all over the elections, especially in Congo? Thank you.
Okay, so what I'll try to do is, so we've got 4 speakers. The question is, what kind of mechanism can be put in place, and mainly around accountability. If you could just highlight one. If each of you can highlight one, and that will be your closing remark. So let's start with you, Kojo.
Yeah, I think for me, vigilance is very important. You almost have to have intelligence within society because you can always be surprised. But what I worry is that we cannot be on sentry duty all the time. So we need more Democrats to sustain democracy. And we have to find a way to reach out to all other stakeholders who are the perpetrators of these violations. We have to find a way to close that gap, because I don't think we will win if we have to constantly, perpetually be on sentry duty.
Masara?
Yes, I think there's been an overly extreme investment in elections to the detriment of governance processes. On a normal day, if the context violates the rights of citizens, if the context is repressive, if the context doesn't favor accountability and oversight, there is no magic that we can work during elections. So in reality, we need to make sure that financing for good governance is at the center of post-elections engagement. So once the spaces are consolidated, when we come to do democracy and elections work, we are walking right into that context. The context cannot manifest itself positively if otherwise during the other periods it is negative. So our rights should be protected right across the board.
Peter?
Well, I think in addition to Marcela and Kojo, I think for me it's the issue of what Mary talked about this morning in terms of the recognition of the right of observers as human rights defenders, but also the communique on the same. I think that for me then speaks to all these processes and all what my colleagues have said. I think that should be it.
Sarah?
Yeah, just on one issue I should have highlighted before is the issue of branding election observers as foreign agents for regime change. In Uganda, we pushed back on this issue by challenging government partners, who are the same partners for civil society, to publish the money they give to government, and citizens were able to see that actually 75% of funding goes to government and only 25% goes to civil society. And then we said, then government is the chief foreign agent, and the debate ended there of name calling. But on the question of DRC, I know also there are some areas in Eastern DRC where there was no voting in the last election because of the conflict, but also because of the other conditions and inability to enable that citizens exercise their rights. I think we need to build strong alliances between domestic election observers and international election observers, so that the problems, challenges faced by the domestic election observers are challenged by the international election observers, who are not normally affected by local conditions of closing civic space. They should be our voice and help us to push back against closing civic space on citizen election observer rights. I thank you.
Well, the gentleman asked the question about Nigeria. Unfortunately, we don't have time. But after this session, I'll be around and I'll be happy to chat with you. But just for the benefit of those who are here, and I'll just say three things. The first is that the elections were a missed opportunity. They weren't the elections that Nigerians deserved, not the elections that Nigerians expected. Secondly, and part of the lessons is, one, there are new ways that politicians are manipulating elections. And election observer groups need to be 2 steps ahead of politicians, because this insidious manner of election manipulation requires more than the traditional tools that we use to observe elections. The second borders on the emotional investment that observers make, on elections. And this is where I would strongly advise that you're careful when you make emotional investments in monitoring processes, that there are exogenous factors that are not within your control, so that when things go out of line and your expectations are not met, you don't feel broken, because you might do everything possible, but the guys who want power at all costs have their ways of circumventing processes. And because this is a meeting not just to reflect on how observer rights have been assaulted, but it's also a meeting to celebrate the contribution of election observer groups to the sustenance of democracy. And quite frankly, this meeting cannot end if I don't invite you, as a way of demonstrating and expressing solidarity with groups and observers who are out there who face all forms of attack, that we all say, we make this proclamation. And Richard, this is by no means trying to convert this place into a street protest. But to have everyone actually scream, with your voice, that election observers, are human rights defenders, because we've got to make that affirmation from this meeting. And lastly, is to say that we should make a call, to defend observer rights. So if I say 1, 2, 3, go, you say, election observers are human rights defenders. Human rights defenders, observer rights should be protected. So I'll take that again. Election observers are human rights defenders. The rights of human rights defenders should be defended. Are we together? So 1, 2, go. Election observers are human rights defenders. The rights of election observers should be defended. Can we take that again? No, now everyone together. 1, 2, go. Election observers are human rights
defenders.
Yes.
The rights of election observers should be
defended. I hope that as we continue with this meeting, we reflect deeply on this. And please, outside this meeting, make this proclamation and promote the need, to protect observers. Like Marcella and everyone said, they are humans. No, we are humans. And we have emotions. We also have families. I was sued. I currently have a case in court in Nigeria. In fact, also a matter in the police. What was my crime? Just calling out a person who was nominated as a commissioner who had questionable backgrounds, and we questioned the appointment into INEC. And she went to court, to challenge that remark that it was defamation of character. I've been invited by the police on several occasions. But for all of us who have dared to defend democracy, we will continue to defend democracy because we have belief in it. And no politician and no actor or authoritarian will prevent us from doing this, because our societies depend on us. And this is a drop down mic. Oh, yeah. The drop the mic moment.
So indeed, election observers are human rights defenders. So those were very chilling accounts of the challenges that the election observers are meeting in our various countries. But I like the resilience. I like the creativity with regards to pushing back against closing spaces and administrative burdens. So thank you very much, Samson, Sarah, Peter, and Marcella. So as it was mentioned, that there is a need to have a network of local domestic citizen observers and also international citizen observers. So this was the account of the local citizen observers. Now we move to the perspective of regional and international election observers and on the role and rights of citizen election observers. And so I'd like to invite our first speaker. The first speaker is Khabele Matlosa from Lesotho, who is the former director of political affairs at the African Union. Khabele, please. This way. Okay. The podium. Oh, yeah. Oh, from here. Oh, sorry, my trouser is here. Sorry.
Yes. Thank you very much, moderator of this session. I've been introduced. My name is Khabele Matlosa from Lesotho. I'm currently a visiting professor at the University of Johannesburg. So I'd like to make that clear so that, because I saw the profile, it says former this, former that. I'm currently, just to make it clear. I'm going to be very brief because our moderator has made my job very easy. And the panel that just delivered excellent insights have also made my job easy. I had 3 points, but because of what we've just heard now, they've reduced it to 2, which makes your life easy too, basically. Before I come to my 2 points, the 3 were this, actually, just so that I'm transparent. I was going to start first and foremost by underscoring the significance of citizen election observation. But that has been done excellently by our moderator and our first panel. I'll skip that. What I will do is to zero in. I'm talking from a Pan-African position, having been at the African Union for a long time. So I'm an academic. So that's my background. So I'm going to be entering from that perspective, intellectual perspective. But I'm also an international observer. So a practitioner. The last time, my friend Richard is here, the last time I was on NDI, International Observation Mission in Lebanon, last year. So I'm an observer. So I'm going to combine practical experience of my own and my intellectual take on these issues. So my first point, therefore, because the first one, the original first is gone. So the one I'm going to zero in on is what then, I'm going to build on what my colleagues have done, to then say, what is the uniqueness of citizen election observation in the context of, right, the entire democratization process? Why is it unique? Because we have even international observation And then I will end on another interesting point I want to share with you, my thoughts around empowerment. How do we empower citizen observers, election observers, so that we scale up their value addition? So those are the two things I'm going to do. But before I get there, I want to start with the context. I liked what the first panel just did. And from their interventions, ably facilitated by Sam, there are 2 points I noted, which I want to reinforce. That would be my context. The 2 points are, one, even as we're discussing democracy in Lusaka today, and we are focusing on elections, we should not make a mistake of equating elections and democracy and vice versa. Because if we do that, we will fall into the trap of what we call in academia the fallacy of electoralism. The fallacy of electoralism. That is, that democracy equates elections, and elections vice versa equates democracy. Let's just settle that. The second point I want us to settle, linked to that point of the nexus between elections and democracy, is another nexus that we shouldn't forget, is the democracy development nexus. That's another important nexus that we shouldn't forget. So every time we discuss democracy, the tendency is that when we discuss democracy, we quickly go to elections. We are overloading elections. That's what I can call election overkill. We then forget that actually democracy, its foundational stone, has to be governance. So we can't reduce governance to elections. We can't reduce democracy to elections. We have to factor in development. Because part of the tragedy we are seeing of our election observers being violated, some of these who perpetrate this, Sarah, are people who are hungry, who have been bored to do this. Possibly in their own conscience, they would not do it ordinarily if their socioeconomic condition was good. That's my context. Now, let's go to my 2 points, quickly. One, the uniqueness of citizen observers. Why are they unique? And I like what Sam did, to say we should recount that thing. They are human rights defenders. And I want to start with a quote, and I quote, "Non-partisan election observers and monitors can be considered as specialized human rights defenders focused on civil and political rights, which are central to achieving genuine elections," close quote. That's the global principles of 2012 that our moderator introduced, page 2 of that. It affirms that indeed they are human rights defenders. Yes. Page 3. Oh. Now, the uniqueness, therefore, stems from that they are human rights defenders. And citizen, national, so their uniqueness is this. They are citizens of a country. They're nationals. So they're unique. They're not just like visitors, visiting to come and go. They are there to stay. 2, they have a permanent engagement with the governance trajectory of a country. And they even go beyond governance, they go into development as well. 3, often they are at the coalface of electoral and governance reforms, so through lobby and advocacy. So they are agents of change. Finally, they fill a gap in the absence of international observers for various reasons, including state restrictions, war, health pandemics. Recently, during the COVID, internationals were not there, but the domestics, the citizen observers were there. Now, let me close, finally, with some points around empowerment and scaling up. It's my last point I'm making. One, how do we then empower citizens observers? How do they scale up their work under conducive conditions? One, rights of citizen observers must be promoted and protected. That's how to scale up. Two, institutional capacity and effectiveness of citizen observer groups should be enhanced. Three, relationship between citizen observers and EMBs, that's election management bodies, should be improved further to facilitate, for example, easy and smooth accreditation. Some colleagues in the last session, they were talking about problems of accreditation, including fees that are unpredictable, that could actually restrict. Finally, there should be a complementarity between citizen and international observers should be continuously deepened and improved every time there's an election. Even in between elections, you can share lessons. On a controversial note, and my last point, controversially, provocatively, can we think maybe of legal reform that could elevate the status of citizen election observers to citizen election monitors? I leave that to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Now, take your place on the stage. Thank you, Khabele, for those provoking thoughts. So next speaker is Barbara Smith. She's the Vice President of Peace Programs from the Carter Center. Barbara, please.
Okay, thank you and good morning. Thank you especially to the hosts of this event and for giving me the opportunity to talk about how international observers are coordinating with citizen observers based on the experience of the Carter Center over the last few decades. I'm going to cover sort of three basic areas: the challenges, as well as what we've learned, and then return to particular challenges in closing space. Of course, coordination between international observers and citizen observers hasn't always been a given. There were often concerns voiced by international observer groups about the quality of data collection by citizen observer efforts. There were also worries about the association might affect the perceived objectivity of international observation efforts. Conversely, on the other side, citizen observer groups argued sometimes that international observer groups took outsized space and didn't often leave much room for citizen groups' voices to be heard. And while there's still a lot of work to be done, I think we've come a long way from that sort of framing. And so I'd like to sort of recognize where we've come and the progress that we've made. We've found ways to continue to remain independent and yet still offer mutual support with the understanding that we're all working toward a common goal of unique, genuine democratic elections that reflect the will of the people. The progress on coordination we have made as a community that includes both international and citizen observers is thanks to the work of organizations like our hosts, as well as the global efforts to improve the quality of citizen and international observation. Efforts like GENDEM, the Global Network for Domestic Monitoring, and that community of practice has emerged around the Declaration of Principles of International Election Observation, or DOP. Oh, thank you. Better. Can everyone hear me? Excellent. These efforts have provided a way for citizen observers and international observers to connect and to learn from one another and to develop strategies for coordination that can have a real impact. So as mentioned already, just last year, GENDEM and endorsers of the Declaration of Principles put out a joint communique on cooperation. And at the national level, international and citizen observers coordinate regularly. I'll just mention three main categories of that coordination. The first is information sharing. In many countries, both groups collaborate to share information throughout the electoral process to strengthen collective analysis and to improve each other's public statements about the process. And secondly, international observers may provide assistance to citizen observers on data collection, which I mentioned, and analysis methods. To give you one example, in Nepal, the Carter Center and the Democracy Resource Center in Nepal shared a common data collection platform called ELMO to collect data. And the third category that I want to mention is around knowledge building. So for example, in cases where a new technology is introduced into an election, something we've all faced, international observers with a breadth of comparative experience across countries, as well as regional observer networks and citizen observers with specific knowledge can work together to understand the particular opportunities as well as the pitfalls of electoral changes, such as introduction of these new technologies. International and citizen observers are also cooperating to address challenges around social media and and disinformation, and of course, online hate speech. To give you another example, in Myanmar, the Carter Center worked with national partners to monitor social media during and after the 2020 elections. And finally, cooperation between both groups post-election is critical. That period post-election is very, very critical. I'll say that again. Citizen observers, when equipped with the necessary resources, can advocate not only for implementation of their own recommendation, but also for the recommendations of international observer groups. This is critical to ensuring that election observation contributes to the promise of democracy. In countries where space for civil society may be closing, I would argue that the importance of this coordination actually increases. In these circumstances, international observers, as already mentioned by Sarah, can support citizen observation groups by amplifying their messages and making sure their voices are heard in the international arena. But in closing spaces, restrictions placed on observation and threats to observers can also make coordination very, very difficult sometimes. As mentioned, it is critical to remember that citizen observation is not only a form of human rights monitoring, but it is a human right. As highlighted by Special Rapporteur Mary Lawlor and Special Rapporteur Klein, and as echoed here in this room, I will say it also again, citizen election observers are human rights defenders, and as such must be protected by states, but also by the international community and by international election observers as well. I would also like to close with a note of gratitude as well, and a thank you to all of the citizen observers who stand up for democracy every day. We know that this is not without great risk. We see you, and I just want to say we stand with you, and thank you again. And with that, I will end. Thank you. Okay.
Thank you, Barbara, for that insightful presentation. We move on to the last speaker, Richard Klein from Global Elections, is a Global Elections Director from the National Democratic Institute, rather, thank you.
I'm not sure which microphone is working. And apologies for the technical challenges that we've had this morning, but really appreciate the huge turnout that we have here today and the amazing people that we've had from citizen observer groups across Africa, who I think have really demonstrated really the courageous work that they are doing day in, day out to defend the rights of citizens to vote across the continent and in their countries, right? And to provide, right, accurate, timely, evidence-based information, systematic information on the conduct of elections to help Africans be able to determine for themselves whether elections meet their expectations or not. Let me start out by bringing a message of greetings from Pat Merlot. Many in this room know him as the former director of elections at NDI, who 10 months ago I pushed out. Pat is certainly following the events very closely and wishes that he could have been with us here today. Let me also say it's a great honor to be speaking with my old friend Matlosa, who is always controversial, and that's why we asked him to be here. And had he not been, we would have been disappointed. Also, it's a great honor to have Barbara Smith, the Vice President for the Carter Center Peace Programs, here with us today. One of the reasons that I'm in this room that was referenced at a Carter Center event yesterday was the historic elections in 1991. Those elections were jointly observed by the Carter Center and NDI, but even more importantly, they were observed by the first time in Africa by citizen observers, something called the Z-Vote team that my professor, Mike Bratton, many of you in this room know, played a key role in that initiative, and that CCMG, who are our host today, are the legacy of that effort. And they really should be commended for the work that they have done over the years, and they played an absolutely essential role in the most recent elections here in Zambia, which have been heralded, and one of the reasons that, Zambia is one of the host countries for the Summit for Democracy. The panel by Samson and Kojo and Marcella and Peter and Sarah, there's very little for me to say after that. An amazing job from all of you. I think you see the caliber of leadership amongst citizen observers across the continent. But let me make a few points which are really echoing things that have already been said, One is about the role of international observers. Certainly NDI, like the Carter Center, sees our role as fundamentally amplifying the voices of citizen observers. And we need to do more, to speak out on behalf of the rights of citizen observers. We have more access. We have more power, And we need to use our privilege to help those groups. Olga, the chair of GENDEM, was unfortunately not able to join us this morning, but she would have talked about the joint communique of cooperation between international and citizen observers that was launched at the Declaration of Principles meeting in Brussels last year. Barbara made reference to that, and that provides a framework for greater cooperation between international and citizen observers, and that should be used to the fullest to ensure that not just international observers, but citizen observers are able to fully fulfill their rights as human rights defenders. The second thing is we are honored that while Mary Lawlor was not able to join us today, you could see the passion that she spoke with, That we need to all be, as Samson led us in our chant, recognizing that election observers are human rights defenders. That entitles them to rights. It also gives them an ability of redress when those rights are not respected, We need to do more to educate people so that they understand and to protect citizen observers. One of the things that Olga would have pointed out today if she had been able to speak is this is a global problem. That a week ago there were presidential elections in Montenegro. The Citizen Observer Group there verified the results of those elections. They are now going to a runoff, and the ruling party is likely to lose for the first time in many, many years. They received death threats. It was blunt. It said, we will kill you if you do a parallel vote tabulation for the second round. That is having a chilling effect on what is going on in Montenegro. And so we cannot overstate the importance of these issues. Next, I would say, and I think Matlosa touched on this, we have now standards for international observation. We have standards for citizen observation. and those have been popularized and are well known. But what we don't have, what we still lack, are in fact global standards for accreditation. What is appropriate or not appropriate to demand? And there has been a homogenization of accreditation procedures for international and citizen observers, where they often have to use the same procedures and have the same requirements. Those requirements may be very easy for international observers to meet, but incredibly difficult for citizen observers to meet. Further, as Matlosa said, citizen observers are citizens of the country. They have rights already, even without being human rights defenders. They are simply trying to be active citizens in their own democracies. So we need global principles, global standards for accreditation that differentiate between international and citizen observers. Right. Next, I have two more points. Next is, we are on the eve of the Summit for Democracy. The Summit for Democracy has asked countries to make commitments, democratic countries to be beacons, to demonstrate the importance of democracy, and to be honest, to embarrass other countries, right? Summit for Democracy countries, right, should make commitments to expand the space for citizen observers, to take reforms to reduce the administrative burdens. That is an easy commitment that Summit for Democracy countries can do and that they can use to differentiate themselves from those countries that are still authoritarian. On my last point, because those of you who know me in the room, and I'm going to stick to time apparently, and people who know me know I never say anything with a sentence that I can't say with a paragraph, but I'm also a person who's in the weeds. We are now at a point in elections around the world and across Africa that the old ways, as Samson said, of observing elections are still necessary and important, but we have to come up with new ways of observing elections. One of those things relates to data. IAGA Africa is driven by data. You need access to data from the election commissions. There is an open election data initiative that puts out the standards for sharing election data so that observers, citizen, and international have the information they need to be able to actually assess the quality of elections. Because elections are less and less stolen on election day, but before election day. Understanding the quality of the voter register and the voter register process, as Peter said, is impossible if you don't actually have access to the voter register. If you can't actually look at that and say, how many new names were added? How many women are on the voters list? How many young people are on the voters list? And to be able to do that, right, independently, not relying on data that was given to you from the election commission, but that you did it yourself, right? With that, I want to close. It's a great honor to be here, and it's so good to see not only all the citizen observer leaders on the stage, but so many friends and people from the citizen observation community across Africa in this room and with us virtually online. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Richard. We are supposed to move to question and answers, but we're looking at the time now. We are supposed to move on to the next session at 11 hours. So perhaps at this stage, just allow me to thank Khabele, Barbara, and Richard for providing an international observer perspective on citizen observer rights in Africa. Of course, we appreciate the solidarity and support of international observers with citizen observer organizations. And we hope we can strengthen that support as it has been emphasized already in this meeting. So thank you very much, Barbara, Khabele, and Richard. Now we'll hear from Sipho Malunga, the Open Society Foundation Africa's Director of Programs, who will speak about the role civil society plays in promoting credible elections. Again, we would like to thank you, Sipho, and would like to thank OSF for the generous support that has made today's event possible. Thank you, Sipho, and thank you, OSF. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Father Muyebe, and thank you to all the speakers that have preceded me. They've made it so easy for me because everything I wanted to say has been said. So on that note, I would like to thank you very much and excuse myself. But more seriously, I'm a lawyer. I consider myself a human rights lawyer. I'm generally considered a regime change agent in many places. And you know, as a lawyer, classification matters. If you want to call something a right, you have to show the basis for why something is a right. If you want to create an obligation for somebody to respect a right, you have to point to where that obligation is, what it is, who's obligated, who has the right, and what are the procedures for recourse. So the starting point is always, from a human rights defender's perspective, what is the rationale for arguing that electoral observers are human rights defenders? It's a question. Are we expanding these human rights defenders to everything? Because it's a catchy phrase, right? Everything keeps, from development, human rights-based approaches, then we move to something else. In the development sphere, we have all these catchphrases, and then they catch on for some time, everybody's using them, and then we move on. So human rights defenders is not so much new, but in more recent times, it has gained greater prominence. And the question has been, we now have women human rights defenders. So are we all going to be human rights defenders? And what is the basis to argue that? So as a lawyer, I believe classification matters. For you to be a human rights defender, there has to be a right that you are defending, right? And what are the rights here that we're talking about? Because we must point to a specific right in relation to which you are playing a critical role, in relation to which your role in protecting that right must be respected and preserved and protected. By and large, when it comes to electoral observers, we're really talking about civil and political rights here. And for civil and political rights to be protected, you need a whole range of things, right? You need context, conducive environment for those rights to be protected, which means that institutions, officials, laws, attitudes allow for those rights to be respected and protected. You may have the law, but you may have attitudes that don't follow, officials that don't respect the law, that don't give a damn about them. You must also have, beyond the country's regional and continental and global frameworks that reaffirm that right. Let's say this is not just a right in Uganda, but it is considered a universal right. And therefore, you are obligated as a state to the international community because this is a right that you are obliged as a state to respect. It is not up to you to pick and choose which rights you will respect. So that's the first point. Electoral observers ensure that citizens are able to redeem and enjoy their right to participate in civil and political life of their countries. That's a fundamental right. It's the first and most important one. We've broadened the concept, of course, to social and economic rights, which also require to be defended to the extent that, for example, a mining company cannot pollute while it is mining and claim that, no, you know what, it's okay. This is necessary for me to extract these minerals. I'll pollute the environment, I'll pollute the water, and I can walk away. So we recognize now that economic and social rights must also be defended and protected. because citizens and communities must be protected from drinking polluted water, which poisons them and kills them. So that's also fundamental. But in this particular case, we're talking about protecting civil and political rights. And as Khabele said, without equating elections to democracy, one of the most fundamental political rights is the right to participate in choosing officials to govern you, participate in being an official, choosing to be an official. So the rights to assembly, the rights to participation, the rights to vote and be voted for, those are fundamental and everybody has them. You cannot take that right away. And the role of electoral observers clearly works to ensure that those rights are protected. So it's absolutely critical to start from that standpoint, because the question is going to always be, on what basis do you consider yourself a human rights defender? So who protects those rights? The right to vote, the right to be voted for, the right to participate, to campaign freely, the right to go to rallies, to express yourself, your opinions at rallies. Who protects those rights? Who protects those rights? That's a question. So the first, of course, is that the state is obliged to respect and protect those rights. And all other citizens are obliged to respect and protect those rights. Because we must also run away from the assumption that it is only the state that violates rights. It is not. It is political parties stopping other political parties from running their campaigns, disrupting them using violence. So the obligation to protect rights exists for everybody in that society. But of course, in many instances, we tend to see that the people who violate those rights are the ones that have a stake in ensuring that those rights are not enjoyed. And in many instances, it's the state, usually a ruling party, but sometimes it's just political parties. In any case, because the role of observers is not just violated by ruling parties. Let's be honest here, right? So that, for me, is my point of departure. I know that I have a few minutes, so I will wind up. As Kojo said, we have 16 elections this year, 19 next year. The reality is that the work of observers will continue to remain important. We're coming out of, and how quickly we forget. We forget that 2.5 years ago, observers couldn't even travel anywhere because there was COVID. And we forget that elections were being conducted. I mean, these guys just went on as if life hadn't changed. Remember in Burundi? Of course, we had some unintended, maybe intended consequences from that election because the guy died, right? In the process of forcing an election where people were saying, listen, you can't have an election under these conditions. But we forget that many countries still just continued. So we're coming out of this and we have to reassert those rights, which for 2 years, in many of our countries, the space shrunk even further than it had already been shrinking. For 2 years, many of our governments were governing without any scrutiny, not just externally, but from internal. For 2 years, political parties, opposition parties in countries could not organize, they could not meet, they could not argue, parliaments would not sit. So for 2 whole years, 2.5 years, we must accept, because we always talk about a shrinking space, COVID, the impact of COVID on shrinking the space further, and the importance, the need for us to now accelerate reclaiming much of that space. And there was one last point which was mentioned. In many instances, by the time observers come, the most beautiful and peaceful time of elections is 3-4 days a week before. It's the best time when observers fly in, international observers fly. That's the best time. It's beautiful, everybody's happy, nobody's being beaten anymore. Those that are being beaten are already put away, nobody can see them. So, but fundamentally we know that nowadays elections are stolen years before. Years. By the time you get there, you're coming to simply sanctify and endorse a sham that has been going on for a long, long time. The role of technology, the manipulation of voter registers, the use of technology, the manipulation of civil registers, voter suppression over periods of time, stopping young people from registering,
And mundane things such as not giving young people, in many countries, I mean this country in particular, we know that what's been so fundamental and transformative is young people. First-time voters usually win this election in this country. And we know that in Africa, with over 75% of the population under 35, young people will continue, maybe even more so, define the political future of this continent. Only if they are allowed to be on that ballot, one, and two, if they are allowed to vote. And our governments are smart, they are realizing this. They are now stopping them from even getting on the ballot. And this is happening, well, we've just come from Nigeria. We all know what happened there. We see what's happening in Zimbabwe, in other countries. We have to look very carefully at that. Now, the question for me and for you is, where do observers come in there? How do those dynamics feature in your observer reports? Because your observer reports are going to be about, we arrived a week before campaigning was free, we attended these rallies, it was okay or it wasn't. There was a bit of violence over there. On the day, polling stations opened, okay. People voted, it was taking this long for people to vote, and it was okay. That's usually what happens, right? There might have been a few problems here. We also observed, the media, we saw there was more of the ruling party. We don't think this should happen. That's the report. How do you capture the voter suppression that has happened over a period of 5 years? How does an observer report from Nigeria capture what happened with the PVCs? How does an observer report capture the NICUVs of this world? These technology companies that are fiddling with voter registers, that are giving multiple register cards, that are letting people who are dead vote. They come back to life when elections come. I'm going to stop there, but that's a big challenge. And the question might be that we have to completely rethink the voter registration template. Completely. We now may need continuous observation, continuous per the electoral cycle. We all know the electoral cycle model. So that's a challenge. And as OSF, we're happy to work with you, hear your thoughts and ideas on responding to that challenge, because otherwise it's already cooked. We get there, it's already cooked, and it looks very nice, tastes very nice, but we want to get in the kitchen. Maybe not even in the kitchen, we want to see who's growing, where is this food being grown, etc., etc. Are they using fertilizer, pesticides? No, we don't like it, we want it organic. Just don't wait for the dining room table, because it all looks very nice and set, and it tastes nice too, but maybe you're really eating poison. Thank you.
Thank you, Sipho. I know you'd have loved to have more time here. You have a lot of thought-provoking remarks there. Now we know the legal basis on which we call ourselves the human rights defenders, and also how we must reassert our right. But more importantly, also how we must advance the electoral integrity in Africa. So thank you very much, Sipho. So we move on. We are deeply honored to have with us today Zambia's own Dr. Monde Muyangwa with us, who is the USAID's Assistant Administrator for Africa. CCMG, as well as other African citizen observer groups featured here today, have been and continue to be the beneficiaries of partnership with USAID. So Dr. Monde Muyangwa will be making closing remarks on the 40 years of USAID's support to citizen observers across Africa and around the world. Dr. Muyangwa, please.
Thank you. Thank you, Father Muyebe. Good morning, everyone.
It is wonderful to be here with you this morning, and it's truly been an inspiring session for me to hear the experiences of such an impressive group of civil society leaders and thought experts, such as all of you sitting in this room. You truly embody the spirit of what the fight for democratic elections and good governance looks like on the continent, but also across the globe. And I thank the organizers and our partners for putting together this session at this critical moment in time on the margins of the Summit for Democracy. Before I get into my formal remarks, let me stop for a moment to just acknowledge all the speakers this morning, to let you know that we see you, we hear you, and we stand in partnership with you. That is very important. You all are at the forefront of defending and expanding democracy and good governance on this continent. That is very important. That is critically important. We see you as the defenders of democracy, the defenders of good governance. And I hope that my participation here as the Assistant Administrator for Africa, USAID, and my colleagues' participation, the Principal Deputy Assistant Secretary at the Department of State, Lisa Peterson, tells you that the United States government as a whole and USAID as an agency stands in partnership with you, that we take our partnership really seriously. I know I only have 10 minutes, but with Father Muyebe's permission, so in addition to my 10 minutes, if I can just take maybe a couple of minutes to just read back to you what I thought I heard from all of you today, so that you can know that we heard you. One of the things I heard this morning was a revisit, an alert, that it's not just that the space is closing, but that it has already closed in some countries. So that requires a different approach to how we engage. Second, that elections do not by themselves a democracy make. That what happens in between elections is the opportunity and the obligation that we all have to strengthen good governance. Third, that the strategies for impacting elections in a deleterious way are constantly evolving, and therefore we too, and all of you especially, those of you at the front lines, should constantly be revisiting your toolbox, your strategies, and what is in it, so you can stay 2 or 3 steps ahead of what the other side is doing. Fourth, that while African partners, or you, may be at the forefront, your international partners stand with all of you. But that it is important that as international partners, we look at where our engagement might be most helpful and impactful. So the playbook of yesteryear does not suffice today. It will not do the trick. I think I also heard just a few minutes ago about the importance of fighting not just the fight of today, but the fight for the future in this space. Sometimes we're so concentrated on the here and now, but that it's important to fight for the future as well. And I thought my sister in the first panel captured this very well in saying, you know, we're working for a better world. We're working to better our countries. We have nowhere else to go to, and therefore we're at the forefront of bettering our countries, and we're fighting for our children. If that doesn't wake you up in the morning, I don't know what will. I don't know what will. So thank you so much for that. And then finally, I think contextualizing the work that you do within the human rights framework. You are human rights defenders. That is really, really critically important. So thank you for the work that you do. And now I will launch into my formal remarks, but I just wanted to let you know that we heard you, and to the extent that we can, we will continue to partner with you and to work with you to make sure that we can advance this agenda alongside you. So let me once again thank NDI and the other partners for organizing this important discussion, along with the SEPS partners, that is the Consortium for Elections and Political Process Strengthening. Having this discussion now really matters. So thank you for organizing it, and the funders and others who have brought the experts to the table to make this possible. USAID is committed to the empowerment of local civil society and other actors as key stakeholders in democratic processes. Our localization strategy focuses on locally led development, and we look to all of the thought leadership in this room and beyond to inform our future engagements in support of citizen election observation. At the risk of repeating what has already been said, let me talk a little bit about why citizen election observation is important for both electoral integrity and democracy. As I'm sure you all agree, the right of citizens to choose their representatives through elections is the cornerstone of a democracy. It is also a fundamental human right. Ultimately, elections must reflect the will of the people to be considered credible and genuine. But how do we know if elections truly do reflect the will of the people? If we look at the body of international and regional human rights norms and obligations, including the Southern African Development Community's principles and guidelines governing democratic elections, 4 main principles stand out: inclusiveness, accountability, transparency, and genuine competition. Citizen election observations plays a crucial role in all 4 of those principles, and that is why USAID supports citizen election observation, an essential part of our electoral assistance worldwide. Citizen observation promotes transparency because citizen observers are truly the eyes and ears of voters. Observers' impartial and accurate assessments help cut through the disinformation and partisan spin to help the public determine whether or not they can trust the electoral process. Citizen observation strengthens inclusiveness by bolstering citizen participation and engagement in elections. It often engages women, youth, and other marginalized populations in significant numbers, as we have seen with our panelists here today. And in many countries, women make up more than half of the observers and often lead observer groups. I was honored to witness the recent elections in Nigeria. And as a gray-haired person, one of the things that really stood out to me and gave me a lot of hope was to see the young people in Nigeria so actively engaged in the elections process. That's what it's all about. And we should be creating more and more of those spaces. They're the owners of Africa's vision. They're the owners of what this continent can achieve. Getting them to the table, having them play critical roles on both ends of the election process is absolutely critical. And so I hope we can continue to push on that. Citizen observation promotes genuine competition by exposing and deterring fraud and manipulation that can create an uneven playing field. And election observation bolsters accountability by engaging citizens in their oversight of political processes. It promotes public confidence in electoral processes or calls out processes that do not meet democratic norms. Citizen observers issue evidence-based recommendations which form the basis for election reform advocacy. This helps enhance governmental accountability during and in between election periods. Elections also need to be peaceful, to be credible, In many countries, citizen election observation also helps identify and mitigate electoral violence, including violence against women and other marginalized groups. We recognize that citizen observation is not just about elections. It links to broader efforts to build democratic resiliency because it provides an important way aside from voting, for citizens to participate in elections and democracy more broadly. Over the past 4 decades, USAID has been a leading donor in supporting democratic elections around the world. Since the early days of the mid-1980s, our electoral assistance has evolved and expanded greatly. We have supported electoral integrity efforts in dozens of countries, and while our assistance has expanded to new areas, one thing has remained constant, is that we prioritize supporting non-partisan citizen election observation. The growth of non-partisan election monitoring over the past 4 decades has been a truly global movement that has collectively mobilized millions of citizens around the world, and USAID is honored and humbled to have helped support these efforts for nearly 40 years. Like many of you, we were inspired in 1986 by the efforts of over 500,000 citizens in the Philippines who came together under the banner of the National Citizens Movement for Free Elections to expose fraud in the vote count. From those early, courageous, people-centered efforts, USAID supported partners like NDI to build the capacity of citizen elections observers around the world. And as the Berlin Wall fell, USAID supported and helped civil society groups across Eastern Europe and Eurasia to mobilize citizen observation and electoral reform advocacy efforts. The spread of citizen observation continued across Africa, Asia, and the Middle East, and USAID has been there all along to support this locally led, citizen-driven movement. And I emphasize the locally led. We do not partner with you to be in the lead. That does not work. We partner to support, to walk alongside you, to give wind behind your backs, because that's the model that works in terms of Africans being in the lead of their own future and their own destiny of the Africa that they want to see. During this time, election observation has not only spread to more countries, it has continually evolved and adapted. It has become increasingly sophisticated, particularly with the increased use of systemic approaches. This includes parallel vote tabulations, which enable observer groups to verify the accuracy of the vote tabulating process. And we're constantly looking to those on the ground fighting for democracy and improved elections on how to further evolve and adapt. Since in many countries, electoral manipulation has shifted away from election day, as was so critically pointed out by the last speaker, technical assistance from partners like NDI is also seeking to develop methods to monitor all aspects of elections, from voter registrations and campaign finance to electoral violence, disinformation, and electoral dispute resolution. Zooming out to the global level, because as many of you who were born on this continent know very well, there is a famous proverb that says a child who has not traveled thinks their mother's cooking is the best, right? So one of the things we seek to do is to share lessons learned, and I saw part of that working here. It's not just about sharing lessons learned, but it's also uplifting each other as you go through this struggle. So a lot has been learned from the global sphere that we are counting on and using to provide support across the world. And a key moment in the history of citizen observation was the 2012 adoption of the Declaration of Global Principles at the United Nations. Again, NDI played a key role in collaborating with citizen observer groups on that, and USAID is proud to have helped support those efforts. Alongside the Declaration of Global Principles emerged the Global Network for Domestic Election Monitors, or GENDAM. Taken together, GENDAM and the Declaration of Global Principles have established the basis for defining what credible election observation is. It has helped to strengthen the credibility and professionalism of citizen election observation worldwide. Another important reason USAID supports citizen election observation is that in the long run, building the capacity of citizen observers is sustainable and empowering, promoting local ownership and locally led development. Despite this success as we have had, and in some cases perhaps because of this success, citizen election observers have faced increased threats and restrictions in recent years. And during the panel, we heard directly from observation group leaders about the grave challenges that they and their peers face. We see this not only in Africa, but around the world. Citizens observers have faced increasing threats, disinformation, accreditation hurdles, restriction on access to the electoral process. And a growing number of countries are passing legislation, making it harder and more risky for civil society organizations to register and operate. With these challenges in mind, we are encouraged by recent progress on defending observer rights, but more cooperation among the global electoral integrity community is also clearly needed. As others have noted, the recent statement by UN Special Rapporteur on Freedom and Peaceful Assembly and Association and on human rights defenders is a significant milestone for election observers around the world. It recognizes for the first time ever that election observers are human rights defenders, and this statement was a culmination of work by, among others, many longtime USAID partners around the world, including some sitting in this room. So it is great to see the growing collaboration among the years between international and citizen observers. This was solidified by the recent joint communique between the Declaration of Principles for International Observation Community and the Global Network for Domestic Election Observers. Let me conclude, because I know I've gone well over my time, with saying this event has shown robust citizen election observation and its centrality to promoting elections that reflect the will of the people. But the impressive worldwide movement of citizen observation has been greatly challenged by greater restrictions and other challenges in recent years. And that because of this, there's an urgent issue that goes beyond elections, and it is timely that NDI has organized this event. We encourage all of you sitting in this room to work even more closely to defend and advance citizen observation rights around the world. As I said earlier, USAID is your partner, and we look forward to working with all of you on this important endeavor. Along those lines, and particularly since tomorrow's Summit for Democracy proceeding here in Lusaka will focus on promoting free and fair elections, we hope to see all of you tomorrow. I conclude with thanking you again for your courage. I conclude with thanking you all again for making a difference, for trying to create a better world for all of us and for future generations. And as they say here in Zambia, Zikomo, thank you very much. We look forward to working with you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Muyangwa, for those words of support. But also on behalf of the citizen observer groups gathered here, I would like to express our gratitude with the words that you've delivered here. You have just reaffirmed the partnership between USAID and the citizen observer groups. Thank you very much. While in the long run, we at CCMG and other citizen observer groups hope to develop domestic sources of funding, support from USAID and other development partners remain critical to enable civil society to defend the rights of citizens to vote and to promote more inclusive, transparent, and accountable elections. So thank you for those encouraging words. Now, at this stage, at this juncture, allow me to officially close this Observer Rights event by noting areas of action that we can take and to advance observer rights across Africa and around the world. First, as citizen observer organizations, we need to stand in solidarity with each other and support each other. Our regional and global networks provide platform for this. Second, civil society in more democratic societies need to push for stronger protections for citizen election observers to serve as a model to make it more difficult for authoritarians to undermine observer rights in their countries. Third, we should embrace the recommendation for a first ever systematic assessment of observer rights across Africa and around the world that provide empirical information to advocate for reforms. Fourth, citizen observers, international observers, and election management bodies should work together to formulate international standards for accreditation based on recognizing the value of accreditation, but at the same time ensuring accreditation is neither burdensome nor excessive, and that procedures are tailored to the different realities of citizen and international observers. Lastly, we should advocate for greater access to election-related data based on the Open Election Data Initiative and potentially taking advantage of the Open Government Partnership Framework. Again, I would like to thank the African networks of citizen observers that sponsored this event. The Election Support Network for Southern Africa, the East and Horn of African Election Observers Network, the West African Election Observers Network, and the African Election Observers Network. I also want to thank our moderators, panelists, and speakers. Thank you to Samson, to Kojo, to Sarah, to Peter, Marcella, Khabele, Barbara, Richard, Sipho, and Monde. Can you join me in giving a big round of applause? I would like to acknowledge the important step taken by the UN Special Rapporteurs for the first time to explicitly recognize election observers, including citizen election observers, as human rights defenders. While this on its own will not ensure civic organizations, but civic organizations can observe elections, it does provide important rights and the opportunity for redress when those rights are not respected. Efforts should be undertaken to ensure the African Court on Human and People's Rights similarly explicitly recognizes election observers as human rights defenders. I would like to offer a special thank you to Olga, who did not join, but because of some technical effort and some technical challenges from Ukraine. Despite the war in her country, she found time, or she dedicated this time to be part of this conversation remotely. We offer our solidarity to her and to the OPORA, the group that she leads, as they continue to promote credible elections in Ukraine, even as the war continues. I also want to offer solidarity on behalf of all of us to the Citizen Observer Group Center for Research and Monitoring in Montenegro, who we heard just this week, and they received death threats for observing elections. We are also concerned about the safety of another Montenegrin Citizen Observer Group, Center for Democratic Transition. We condemn in the strongest terms possible these efforts to intimidate independent, non-partisan citizen observation. We appreciate the efforts of the global network of domestic election monitors and other citizen observer networks to focus attention on the challenges faced by citizen observer organizations. We welcome the new joint communique calling for great cooperation between international and citizen observers. We call on the international observers to redouble their efforts to support citizen observer rights. As noted, we endorse the global network for domestic election monitors' efforts to undertake systematic research on citizen observer rights and undertake the first ever global State of Citizen Observation report. Further, we also support the recommendation of developing international standards for observer accreditation procedures. I would like to again thank the representatives of the Electoral Commission of Zambia for attending this event. While election management bodies and citizen observers have different roles to play, we are both guided by the desire for citizens to be able to freely exercise their right to vote, for elections to be conducted in accordance with international and regional standards, as well as the local laws and regulations, and for results to reflect the ballot cast. Where appropriate, we should develop positive working relationships. And as such, we hope that the ECZ, that's the Electoral Commission of Zambia, will support codifying the rights of civic organizations to observe elections in Zambia. Again, we want to thank Dr. Muyangwa, Monde Muyangwa, for making time to join us this morning and for your important message of solidarity. I want to acknowledge the general support of USAID that USAID has provided to CCMG since our inception. We greatly value our long-standing partnership with USAID, including the mission director, Peter Weibler, and Director of Democracy and Rights and Governance Office, Nina Bowen. In addition to support from USAID, we also appreciate past funding from the EU and FCDO. I would also like to thank the National Democratic Institute, which has long worked with CCMG to enhance our capacity to systematically observe election processes, defend the rights of citizens to vote, and to promote credible elections in Zambia. We greatly appreciate the deep partnership formed with NDI over the years. I also like to thank NDI for helping to organize this event in partnership with the financial support from the Open Society Foundation. Without your support, this event would not have happened. A special thank you to Johandra Delgado, Kion Borba, Mwiches Chela, Comfort, Pingilani, and Koreta Mwanza for all your hard work to make this event a reality. Finally, I want to appreciate everyone who attended this Observer Rights event in person or virtually. All of you have a role to play in helping to defend the rights of citizen observers. Thank you for joining us today. So those of you who have some time, please join us for lunch starting at 12 hours. The coupons will be distributed shortly. With these few words, this event on defending citizen observers' rights is officially closed. Thank you very much.